keeping you up to speed on all your Colorado teams. It's time for Coffee Break.
For people like you and I, Monday means the start of another week here in the early parts of 2025. But for the Denver Broncos, this Monday in particular marks the end of a strange, exciting, unexpected, and yet somewhat disappointing season, as they will have their locker cleanouts a little bit later today and will lick their wounds a little bit after a 31-7 drubbing by the Buffalo Bills. Certainly not the outcome that I or you, I'm sure, hoped for and maybe expected after a Friday that was filled with a lot of optimism and a lot of energy coming off of, the first postseason berth since 2015 and all of the momentum that came associated with that. And I, like most of you, I'm sure, were left a little bit downtrodden, a little bit bummed after the end of that game. But for me, it was a little bit unique. And I spoke about it on social media. And I said that I felt a happy kind of sad. It was a different kind of disappointment. And over the course of this show, I'm going to try to articulate exactly, what I meant by that and see if hopefully some of you were feeling the same way. But before I get into that, I want to go through some of the key points and the key moments in the game of where things kind of all unraveled for a Broncos team that started out as hot as you could possibly start. I mean, they came out, drove right down the field, and the Troy Franklin to Bo Nix connection, of all the times for it to possibly connect, that felt like the best time for them to be the underdogs on the road, getting the ball first, and then coming out and punching the Buffalo Bills in the mouth and drawing a little bit of blood. The problem is, after drawing the first punch, the Broncos failed to get up off of the mat after that. And there was just a lot of factors to me into that game that left me head scratching a little bit and didn't make sense. For one, as we've seen for many portions of this season, the run game was first and foremost on that list, because the running game was kind of where everyone's eye was turned at the start of the game, because prior to kickoff, we got the announcement that Audric Estime, the draft pick, the guy who we've seen Sean Payton kind of start to trust more in those end-of-game situations, and a guy that had a lot of promise coming out of college, inactive for this game in favor of Tyler Bidet, who hadn't seen any action since the early portion of the season and had his most explosive performance very early in the season against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And for a listless running back room that struggled to find any footing, I think there was a lot of juice around the fact that Tyler Bidet was going to be a major feature in this game, and it was going to be one of those, hey, it's the playoffs, you got nothing left to lose, let's lay all our cards out on the table. Well, as it turned out, Tyler Bidet had 2 carries for a whopping 8 yards over the course of that game. So right off the bat, going into the game with the expectation that we were going to see some juice and some life and some different creativity in the run game using Bidet now that he's finally active and able and ready to go, it just didn't materialize. And my first question was, why? Why could Audric Estime not have done what Tyler Bidet did? And I know you might be saying, well, hey, the game script kind of got out of hand on him, especially on the back half of that game. The time of possession really changed the way they had to approach things. I get that. But you're telling me 2 carries for 8 yards was the best we could have done? It's not. We see another performance where the Broncos finished with under 80 yards rushing as a team, and Bo Nix is the leading rusher for the team in a way that is actually bad. I, like others, and I'm sure some of you out there, were calling for a little bit more Bo Nix designed runs to take advantage of the athleticism and the ability that he has in comparison to the running backs that they currently have in the room as a way to kind of keep the chains moving. We saw the Bills do that with Josh Allen. Every third and manageable was Josh Allen time, and he was fully committed and prepared to moving the chains with his feet. We saw it happen with Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. We saw it happen with Jaden Daniels and the Commanders last night. I think, and I think a lot of people think, that Bo Nix has the capability to do some of the things that we saw these other playoff quarterbacks do. They just chose not to do it. A lot of those Bo Nix scrambles, if any, I think all of them, were not by design. They were by broken down play or Bo taking advantage of a scramble situation. So he led the team in rushing basically in spite of the offense, which is a troublesome thing. And like I said, there was no clear bell cow, clear answer going into this game at the running back position. There hadn't been all year, and you weren't going to just magically develop one into the postseason. But I do think that Javonte Williams coming out on the first play and getting a pretty solid push right out of the gate, 6-7 yards, and then immediately subbing off the field after that raises a lot of questions, because I'll side with my guy, Philip Lindsay, who has said on our station, Denver Sports 104.3 The Fan, multiple times throughout the course of this season, as a former running back who very few could speak on it better than he, you have to give running backs a rhythm. And it just doesn't feel like the Broncos running backs ever really got the opportunity to get that rhythm. And it becomes kind of a chicken or the egg situation at that point. Did they not get the opportunity because Sean Payton knows, like a lot of us probably know, that they're just, even if they had the opportunity, it wasn't going to materialize in anything? They just don't have the skill in that room to consistently produce at the NFL level? Maybe. Or was the result of that, the result of them not being skilled enough to kind of produce at a consistent level, the result of them not getting proper opportunities from Sean Payton? You can debate the chicken, you can debate the egg, one way or the other. The omelet didn't taste good. And that's just what we had to deal with for most of the season. So I had a lot of questions as it relates to the run game as for the Broncos. And it was the exact opposite as it relates to the Buffalo Bills, who couldn't stop running all over the Denver Broncos. Josh Allen and James Cook may as well have been Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. The way that they were able to push that pile time in and time out, even against even stacked fronts, man on man, hat on hat, even with an advantage, it just felt like there was nothing the Broncos could do in the trenches to support that. And that really wasn't the only defensive lapse. I mean, obviously, when a team rushes for 200 plus yards on you in a postseason game and takes the time of possession into the 40, 41, 42 minute territory like the Buffalo Bills did, that's a tough recipe to win a football game with, even if you are clicking offensively, because you have such little margin for error. And the Broncos, as we've noted through a lot of points of the season on the offensive side of the ball, their margin for error was slim. They weren't always going to have great opportunities, and so it was important that they maximized them. They did at the start, and then they never even came close to it after that. But defensively, I felt like even beyond the front four and the push in the run game, the tackling was just abysmal. I mean, it didn't matter whether it was Khalil Shakir or James Cook or Josh Allen or Ty Johnson, whoever. They just couldn't bring him down. There was a lot of high tackling, a lot of waist tackling. And when you get Josh Allen in space, poor Malcolm Roach looking like he's in a phone booth, spinning in a phone booth, trying to tackle Josh Allen in the open field. It wasn't a recipe for success. And it wasn't the same tight fundamental identity that we'd seen from the Broncos for the first, 12 to 13 weeks of the season. Now, they did show a lot of regression on the back stretch, back quarter of the season. And that definitely was the case on Sunday, barring the 38 to nothing blowout over the backup Kansas City Chiefs, which was not a real identifier of much as it turned out. So defensively, I just think that the Broncos left so much to be desired. And it raises a lot of questions going forward about what side of that coin that we saw from the Broncos defense is ultimately the true side. Is it the side that we saw for, I would argue, the better part of the season in terms of that first 10, 11 weeks or so, where they were one of the best defenses in football statistically across most major categories? They did set a franchise record for sacks as a pass rushing unit, and it wasn't anchored or dominated by one specific guy, although Nick Bonito definitely has a candidacy to be that guy. But I thought Zach Allen did phenomenally interior, Malcolm Roach, Dondre Tillman. They all contributed in meaningful ways. Jonathan Cooper as well. So is that the real identity, or is it more of the identity of what we saw in the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season, minus the Chiefs, and then in the postseason? Because they are two starkly different things that you have to evaluate. I am going to lean more on the side of what we saw on the first half of the season was closer to the true identity of the defense than what we saw on the last side, because over the course of an NFL season, teams adapt and they adjust. These guys are professionals. They have full staffs of analytics and coaches and data analysts and film instructors and everybody just studying these things week to week to week. And so you're going to adapt, and it's going to be harder. It's going to be harder to produce those numbers in week 14 than it is in week 4. Now, the one unit that I would argue for, 80% of the game, maybe even 90%, because it's really identified to just a few key moments that they weren't, that had a good game in a blowout, as good of a game as you can have in a multi-score blowout that was never, competitive beyond the second quarter, was the special teams unit. I thought Riley Dixon put for the limited scope that a punter has to make things happen in a game, I thought he did so. He pinned them inside the 1 yard line. He converted the Sean Payton wrinkle, the fake punt pass to Marvin Mims for 15 yards for a first down, which gave them a desperate breath of fresh air when they were kind of reeling a little bit offensively, only for them to turn around and go 3 and out 3 plays later. But I thought overall they did pretty good, with the exception of, and I'm still scratching my head over this, and this brought up arguments about the officials and things of that nature, was the fair catch, the decision to not fair catch that punt by Marvin Mims, which leads to him getting blown up by Mac Hollins, I believe it was, in a way that just felt totally unnecessary, because he could have fumbled the ball in a game where you can't turn the ball over. You have to play as clean a football as possible. He could have gotten hurt. That play, seriously, there was a moment when that hit happened where I thought, oh no, he might not get up right away. Now he did, and he didn't fumble the ball, and he didn't get hurt. But what he did do was commit an emotional penalty, which Sean Payton literally talked about in the week or so leading up to this game, about not having to fall victim to emotional penalties, not tripping yourself up and giving the Bills any other additional advantage beyond being a superior on paper, and as it turns out on the field, team. And they did that. Now, was the long snapper standing over Marvin Mims? Yes. So the fact that you're going to flag Marvin Mims for an unnecessary roughness personal foul, when you could have easily thrown an offsetting flag for taunting, and just called it clean, because that's clearly what it is. How many times in the NFL do we see the second guy get caught when the first guy who instigated it goes free? Really, across most sports. That's not exclusive to the NFL. So again, that was an example for me of a team that cracked under a little bit of the weight of the circumstance. They didn't maintain the composure that they needed to, and they're a young team and they're a forming team, and this was the first dip into playoff action for so many of those key important players, including an all-pro and Pro Bowler and Marvin Mims. And it was a moment where I started to feel like the game might start to slip out of hand. Even though the score wasn't totally out of hand at that specific moment, that's where I started to wonder and lean back in my chair and go, ooh, this one might be going nowhere fast. But again, it wasn't just the players on the field are the ones that have to execute it. And ultimately, they failed in a lot of ways. But I think there was a lot to be said about the coaching adjustments on both sides of the ball. Offensively, I alluded to it earlier, Sean Payton's constant platooning of running different personnel groups and formations out, play to play, series to series, drive to drive. Does some of that happen in the NFL across the board? Absolutely. But it does feel like with Sean Payton, and I don't think it's just because we here in Denver have a closer eye on Sean Payton's system than we did when he was in New Orleans, which is obviously true. But I do think, by and large, because it was being pointed out on the broadcast, we've seen it week in and week out, there is just this massive effort to platoon in waves of 2, 3, sometimes 4 offensive player substitutions on a play-to-play basis in the middle of the drive. Now, I think offensive players would tell you, by and large, that a lot of times they like going no huddle because the tempo benefits them and it puts the defense back on their heels and it allows them to kind of wheel and deal and free operate. Well, you definitely can't do that when you're substituting this many players. And I think the microcosm of that entire point was, as I mentioned earlier, the first drive of the game for the Broncos. Javonte Williams comes out and actually pops through for 5-6 yards on the first carry and then immediately walks to the sideline. And again, not to keep hammering the point of our guy, Phillip Lindsay, but what good is that? Why not turn it around and hand the ball off to Javonte again instead of handing it off to Jaleel McLaughlin, who loses 3, and now you go from 2nd and 4 to 3rd and 8 and negate any advantage you have. Now, I know Courtland Sutton picked up the first down on a big pass right after that, but the principle remains the same. I think you're preventing the running backs and the offense from getting into a flow. I think that you're making the offense disjointed to a degree where they aren't able to maximize kind of their read on the defense and take advantage of things on a play-to-play basis. And frankly, it just seems clunky. It just seems like you're adding a lot of steps to something that doesn't need to. And again, I believe in Sean Payton. I will say that up front. I do. I am not, among the James Marilats of the world and others who just want to shout from on high that, that he's a fraud and he's a this, he's a that. You brought in Sean Payton, who has an NFL pedigree as a Super Bowl champion and somebody who made a lot of special things happen during his time in New Orleans, a franchise that he took over when it was not in good shape at all, by the way. And I think by paying him the money you paid him and entrusting him to lead this team, rebuild this culture, and formulate this offense, you have to have some trust in that. Now, that does not mean that you can't be critical. I think that's something that we as fans sometimes toe the line with incorrectly, is that it is okay to believe in something, to support something, but also be critical of it. It's okay to love something and want it to be better at the same time. It doesn't have to be a blind faith or loyalty in this situation. And I think that's kind of where we're at with Sean Payton as a play caller. Because let's be honest, if you want to take Sean Payton as a head coach, as the front man for an organization, there are more pros than cons. Sean Payton in 2 seasons now did what several other coaches before him in the last 8 to 9 seasons have tried and not just failed, but failed miserably to do, which is he has established a baseline culture and identity for this team, and not identity in the sense of we're a run pass, or we're gonna run it down their throats, or we're gonna air it. Not an offensive identity in the sense of how they operate their offense, but an identity as a team, as a group of individuals, and in this case, a lot of young individuals who once again believe in themselves and are watching it manifest into reality. That is not to be understated in terms of the list of accomplishments that Sean Payton has done. He has also managed to do something, at least I think so. And again, some of you the jury may still be out, and I think that's somewhat fair. I think Sean Payton has managed to do something that literally no coach in Broncos history has successfully managed to do, which is draft a true franchise caliber quarterback without any kind of John Elway trading shenanigans and all of that. Draft a true franchise quarterback, a guy who could be the Broncos starter for the next decade plus in Bo Nix. And I think the early chemistry and connection that we've seen from Sean Payton and Bo Nix is evidence that if it's still an incomplete, it's certainly trending in the right direction. On the defensive side of the ball, as it relates to coaching adjustments, I think that Vance Joseph did almost as much as you could do. I think you saw early in the game them shift to a 5-man front to try to nullify and slow down some of that Bills rushing offense, including from the quarterback and Josh Allen. I just don't think it was effective because, you put a 5-man box up there and you tighten things up, but then you couldn't tackle. It was arm tackles and shoulder pad tackles, and they were just they honestly bullied you. If you're the Broncos, they bullied them, and it wasn't pretty, and it wasn't something that we had seen happen to this Broncos defense very much at all during the season. Because even with a lot of their losses, save for the Ravens loss, which I think we all can remember, was a 1-possession game leading into the 2-minute warning of the first half. And by the time Bo Nix takes the field for the first time in the third quarter, they're down double digits. So I think that Vance Joseph did about as much as you could do from a schematic standpoint, but the execution after those adjustments was poor. I think that the secondary got picked on. I think that Riley Moss had a tough game. I think that the pass rush, while they were able to get through a handful of times, we saw Zach Allen making some disruptions up there in the middle. It felt like every time Benito and Cooper had a step, Josh Allen was just one step faster, whether it was one step faster to get out of the pocket or shift the pocket and make a play downfield, or to just take off and run. I saw Nick Benito was a couple of inches away from fingertipping another pass that ended up being a first down carry. I mean, they had a situation where the Bills, after the Broncos sucked the life out of the stadium on that opening drive, 3 of the Bills' first 4 plays were first downs. I mean, if you want to talk about slamming the brakes on a momentum for the Broncos in that first quarter, that was that. They were never phased for the moment. And frankly, that score could have been a lot worse and more lopsided than it was. And I think that while the Broncos defense deserves credit for bowing their necks in the beginning and stopping the Bills twice inside the 10-yard line or so, It's just ultimately in the same situation as you can't have Joe Burrow get the ball 3 times in overtime and expect to win. You can only expect to stem the tide that is Josh Allen in one of the most prolific touchdown scoring offenses in NFL history, and a quarterback in Josh Allen who even amplifies that level in the postseason. You can only expect that tide to stem for so long. But I alluded to Bo Nix earlier, and I do think that is one thing that I came out of this game with as it relates to the Broncos moving forward. The Broncos go with Bo. They, as a team, will go as far as Bo Nix can develop and grow to take them, and a lot of that hinges on what Sean Payton is able to do and continue to do to put Bo in the right positions. Because let's be honest, the season did not end the way we wanted, but the season also did not take place the way that we thought. And I think that is most evidenced by just looking at the rookie year accomplishments for Bo Nix in this 2024-2025 season. He finishes his rookie campaign with the second most passing touchdowns by a rookie in NFL history, second only to Justin Herbert, who had 31. He had the most passing yards among rookies this season. The first winning season for the Broncos for 2016. Is he solely responsible for that? No, the defense definitely carries a part in that, especially with the weight they pulled in the early portion of the season. Snapping an 8-year playoff drought, becoming the first rookie QB to start a playoff game in franchise history. And this is not an expansion team. This isn't the Jacksonville Jaguars. Okay, this is an AFL founding franchise since 1960. And this is the first time a rookie quarterback has started a playoff game for them. John Elway didn't start that game. He came in relief. He was the second rookie to throw a TD on the opening drive of a playoff game in the Super Bowl era. The other was Robert Griffin III in 2012. And even when RG3 did it in 2012, it was not to a fellow rookie wide receiver or pass catcher the way that Bo Nix to Troy Franklin was, making it the first rookie-to-rookie touchdown in postseason history. So is Bo Nix, can you be 100% certain that Bo Nix is the answer and that he's going to be the next franchise guy for 15 years? No, there's so many variables that go in there. But I'll tell you this, I believe it. I believe that he is. And I, like Zach Bye, I do believe that Sean Payton and Bo Nix together passes the confetti test to me. I do genuinely believe, without any ounce of hyperbole behind my statement, that Sean Payton and Bo Nix together will hoist a Lombardi trophy, the 4th, here in Denver before their tenure is up. Now, how long will it take to get there? I don't know. But if this is what we're seeing at the start of a rookie season for a head coach who's now tied his legacy to this young man in Bo Nix, and this young man in Bo Nix, who was the 6th quarterback taken off the board in the first round, who a lot of NFL scouts and minds would tell you now and have said after the fact that they didn't have a first-round grade on it. I think a lot of those guys are backtracking a little bit because he's outpaced that expectation. I do believe that it will happen. And if this is what you're telling me year one of a rebuild looks like, I think that the future is pretty bright. And that, in essence, is why I said at the beginning of the show and when I put it out on social media last night that I felt a happy kind of sad at the end of that game. Was I bummed and sad that the way the game ended? Absolutely. You don't want to see your team get absolutely spanked on national television in the postseason. But again, in order to feel that way, think about what has to happen. Your team has to make the postseason, which they hadn't done in 8 seasons. Your team has to be back to playing relevant football, which they hadn't done in the months of December and January in a long, long time. So while it was sad the way that it ended, and I know that there will be plenty of time for reflection and perspective, in the months to come as we head into what I think is going to be a pivotal and exciting offseason, it did feel a little bit happy in a way that it wasn't another Broncos season that ended with, the typical disappointment of a quarterback experiment that blew up in their face or a coaching staff and a roster that was going nowhere in a hurry. It didn't end that way. It started that way, I think, perception-wise, but it definitely didn't end that way. And that, to me, is worth smiling about. And so I don't know what the future holds for the Broncos. I think they have a lot of pivotal key decisions to make going forward as it relates to free agents to retain, upcoming free agents to retain, players to bring in the offseason, the draft conversation, now that it appears we're not going to be looking for a quarterback for the first time in a while, at least not on a year-to-year basis. There's just excitement, I think, that's been injected back into Empower Field at Mile High Island, back here in Broncos country. And it feels good. And it should feel good. So yes, that I feel like that statement can come across as like, don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened, or some other live, laugh, love thing that you can put above your entryway to your living room. But I don't mean it that way. I mean it in a sense that the sun might be setting on this season, but the future is very, very bright. And so I can't wait to see what happens a little bit later today when we hear from the team and their locker room cleanouts. I can't wait to see, how the end of season press conferences go and the tone that we heard. I think you heard it from Sean Payton and Bo Nix post game a little bit after the game. You saw the tears in Nick Bonito's eyes because a guy who I think feels the same way, who realizes how close they came and what they had in front of them, and they came short, and they're going to remember it. I think Bo Nix remembers it. You can be damn sure Sean Payton remembers it, and I think it's going to fuel a lot of offseason momentum. So I can't wait to see how it plays out, and I can promise you that I, alongside all of you, will be along for the ride. Everybody out there, have a great rest of your day, and we'll catch you tomorrow.